he may have had some serious doubts about how it would be received, but George Lucas's Star Wars proved to be a cinematic phenomenon, enough to give him the impetus to work on an incredibly ambitious follow-up, one which many of us consider the very best of the saga. I'm Stephen Archibald, and welcome to my movie podcast. Hello to your good self, and welcome to They Came From Within Cult Movie Reviews, the daddy of all sci-fi movies, The Empire Strikes Back, 1980. Now rightly hailed as one of the finest, most important science fiction movies of all time, The Empire Strikes Back was plagued by many problems during its production. There were periods in which the lead actors would encounter illness or injury. Shooting ran over schedule and way over budget, with Lucas having to figure out some complex financial deals with the studios. George Lucas provided so much input on this project. However, considering that the making of Star Wars seriously damaged his health, he relinquished the role of director. He picked Irvin Kershner, who he knew through Kershner's film teaching program at the USC School of Cinematic Arts in California. Kershner was initially reluctant to accept, but George persuaded him by pointing out he loved the fact that Irving cared about character development and that he was not a Hollywood insider. And it was Kershner who insisted on the story having emotional depth and weight. Lucas had plenty of ideas for the sequel, and he brought in a fine science fiction writer called Leigh Brackett to create the first draft. Soon after her sci-fi career had taken off, Leigh started writing screenplays, which included her contributing to Howard Hawks' The Big Sleep, and supplying the screenplay for Robert Altman's The Long Goodbye. Sadly, George had to rework the draft after Leigh Brackett died of cancer in March 1978 at the age of 62. He gave his new draft the title Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. Lucas would soon bring in another top writer, but more on that shortly. The Empire Strikes Back is such a wonderful looking movie, and so radically different from its predecessor in many ways, which is highly unusual, in that sequels to highly successful films usually tend to be carbon copies. Luke Skywalker has to spend most of the movie away from Leia and Han Solo becoming a Jedi, whilst a touching romance blossoms between the princess and the handsome smuggler. That is, before the evil Galactic Empire intervenes. Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher had signed up for the sequels, whereas Harrison Ford was far less keen to do so. He had not been happy with his dialogue or his performance in Star Wars, and had even suggested to Lucas that Han Solo should be killed off. Ford primarily took part in this picture to see if he could improve his performance. By the way, the idea of Solo being frozen in carbonite came about as a backup plan in case Harrison declined to appear in the third movie, Return of the Jedi. David Prowse was also unsure about being in this movie as Darth Vader, feeling that his being behind a mask didn't provide him with much security. However, aware that he could easily be replaced, he continued in the part. The suave Billy D. Williams bagged the role of Han's friend, Lando Calrissian. Some great black actors, including Yaphet Kotto and Howard Rollins, were considered for the part. It was Lawrence Kasdan who was chosen to write the screenplay for The Empire Strikes Back. He would also pen the screenplay for Steven Spielberg's Raiders of the Lost Ark. Kasdan's a celebrated writer and director in his own right, responsible for fine movies such as Body Heat, The Big Chill and Silverado. It is worth noting that Lawrence Kasdan also co-wrote the screenplays for Return of the Jedi, Star Wars, The Force Awakens, and Solo, A Star Wars Story. So, he's clearly an integral part of the Star Wars universe. It was the Muppets creator, Jim Henson, who was originally offered the part of Yoda by George Lucas. Henson politely declined, but he did recommend his friend and colleague, Frank Oz. Lucas ended up being so enamoured by Oz's performance as the much-loved Jedi Master that he campaigned to get him nominated for Best Actor in a Supporting Role at the Oscars, but the Academy rejected his efforts, citing that Oz was a puppeteer, not an actor. How short-sighted of them. Gary Kurtz co-produced Lucas's movie American Graffiti with Francis Ford Coppola. He was also a producer on Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back, and he served as an assistant director on the latter. And in late 1977, it was actually Gary Kurtz who came up with the title The Empire Strikes Back. Lucas and Kurtz did not work together again after this movie. However, Gary would go on to produce the 1989 sci-fi film Slipstream, which starred Mark Hamill. The Yoda character's name went through a number of changes during the story's development. He was originally going to be called Minch Yoda, and at one stage the name was even Buffy, believe it or not. Prior to this glorious movie, Irving Kershner's most high-profile directing job was on The Eyes of Laura Mars, which was co-written by the brilliant John Carpenter. Kershner would go on to direct Sean Connery in his swan song as James Bond, Never Say Never Again, in 1983, and he also directed the underrated RoboCop 2 in 1990. I was lucky enough to see this movie as a youngster when it was first shown in UK cinemas. You can imagine how awe-inspiring it was for me to witness such things as the AT-AT walkers in action, the betrayal of Han Solo, and the titanic lightsaber clash between Luke and Darth Vader, the visceral scene in which Luke loses his hand, and of course the colossal revelation that Darth Vader is his father. How on earth could any other Star Wars movie hope to live up to this one? The Empire Strikes Back went on general release in the States on the 21st of May 1980. proving to be another box office monster. George Lucas's cinematic empire was well and truly up and running. I'm Stephen Archibald, and thank you very much for listening to my podcast, They Came From Within, Cult Movie Reviews. All of my episodes are available from most podcast hosts, and you can follow me if you like. May you continue to be guided by the Force. Take care, and goodbye for now.